My plan is to do this in true Google fashion. Google meetings that are scheduled for the top of the hour, they never start at the top of the hour because our conference room scheduling program, doesn't hush up, Google. There's always a meeting will end at the top of the hour, and then it takes about 3 or 4 minutes to get people in and out of the same conference room. So the company has kind of gotten to the habit of meetings start at Google Standard Time at 5 minutes past the hour. So that's about a minute away. So that's when I'll actually get started with this content. For those of you who just joined us, if you could think about what makes for a really great team that you've worked, what has been your experience in that in terms of what was it about the team that made it so great to work with? Okay, my clock says it's 5 after, so I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've got a half dozen slides. We're gonna spend most of our time actually looking at each other and talking. But I do need to have my notes in hand. So our topic for today is we're just going to go over Google's Project Aristotle, and that was its research to answer the question of what makes for an effective team, at least at Google. And so we're going to kind of cover that in broad strokes, and then we're going to zoom in on the single most relevant attribute of team effectiveness, and unpack that a little bit more, and talk about how to cultivate it and what threatens it. And then if things go the way I have planned, we'll have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. But I don't want to wait for Q&A. If you have a question while I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt, because that's when it's most relevant, and that's when people's mind is in that space. So please feel free to unmute and just say, "Hey, Brian," and get my attention that way. Let's see. Before we really dive into the content, why should you bother listening to me? I've been at Google for over 13 years, and while I started as an engineer, I now call myself a recovering engineer. My current day job is as a program manager in Google Cloud, but my passion project at Google has been doing TeamDev Consulting, and then what they call Guru Plus coaching. And what I'm finding is that I really love helping grow better teams and grow better Googlers in general. So that's kind of my passion project, and I'm taking it beyond Google now too. So I'll talk more about that later. My purpose is to cultivate work for the whole person, so that it's not just. There was a time when I worked for the federal government, and there was very much a sense of when you get to work, you check your soul at the door, and you put on a professional mask for the entire day, and that was awful. And so I'm thrilled that Google and other companies are trying to reshape what work is like. But before we get into it, something that I'm recently learning to appreciate in the things I facilitate both at Google and elsewhere is that right now at least, we're probably spending most of our day hunched over a keyboard, pounding on the keys. And so what I want to do right now is just take a couple minutes to encourage you, if you can, if you're able to stand up and just do a little stretch and wiggle things and twist and maybe do a gorilla beat. But shake things up and get the blood flowing a little bit, just to because hunched over a keyboard for hours on end is not the way we were built. And now, now is the time to share that reflection that you captured at the beginning. So, for those of you who want to jump in or who are willing, please unmute and share what was an awesome team for that you in your experience, and what did that feel like?
Hello. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So for me, I feel like the team participation and that is the key. And if everybody comes together sharing on the ideas, I feel that's more effective.
So team members were participating, and they were free with their ideas. They were willing to share some crazy ideas even.
Yeah, open communication, I would say, whatever it is, because I mean, like with more participation, you can bring up good ideas and build on.
Two questions for you. What makes that participation possible? Do you suppose?
Yeah, so I'm dealing a couple of issues over there. So one is like if you are sharing the same passion, that's what I feel. Then people come.
Shared vision.
Yeah. And the other part is like taking that ownership or responsibility, right? I think that makes it. I mean, people to come forward and express. That's what I feel.
Got it. Okay. Anybody else?
I was thinking about clear roles and responsibilities. Feels like usually a really good team. And I was really sitting here thinking about, have I ever worked on a good team? And so I know that's the next part. So I have a lot more examples when I went back through my memory of ones that didn't work, which may say more about me than anyone else, but at any rate. Roles and responsibilities, I think, that are clear is what I would say.
That resonates. Anyone else?
Yeah, hi Brian, this is Jennifer. One of the teams I was on, I don't know how to describe it other than saying we felt in the flow. Like I loved what you said, Kalini, about being able to bounce ideas off of each other, but it was almost like everybody could bring their whole selves to work. We were very supportive because you weren't always on, but people were forgiving about that if you weren't on. But then they also, shine the light on you when you were, and you just felt appreciated. You felt part of the team. You felt like you belonged, and everybody was just contributing to their best ability. Yeah.
So you felt welcome to participate, and you were
welcome, encouraged, supported. Yeah, all those things. And, it made me feel even more creative as a person. Yeah, felt like I'm a superhero. Does that make sense? You're like, I don't know, that's a little wacky, lady.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Was that a little wacky? Sorry.
Well, so that's exactly what we're going to be talking about is what makes it a team welcoming and engaging. So just a little bit of background. Back in 2015-ish, I think, or maybe a little earlier than that, Google did some internal research with their people analytics team, and they ran a project called Project Oxygen, which was they were answering the question, or they were trying to answer the question, what makes for a great manager? And you can read it, that's been published and it's available online. But their follow-on question was, okay, what makes for a great team? And so they posed a question, their research goal was to identify what are the attributes of an effective team. And to clarify, well, first off, they had to address the question. Okay, let's define team in a very tight definition. So they distinguish like a team from a work group. Those are different groups that might report to they respectively might report to a common manager, but a work group is like. Think of it as like a service agency where people are working independently, and all their interactions are with other teams or other stakeholders. But a team, in the strictest sense of the term, means that they have shared goals and they have shared responsibility, and they have a certain degree of interdependence on each other to actually get the work done. So it's not that they're a bunch of individual independent agents. It's that they need to have a certain degree of cohesiveness to be able to function effectively. So Google made that distinction. They also had to answer the question, okay, what do you mean? What do we mean by effective? And so they never really came with a clear definition for that. But they basically surveyed their pool of research, or the people they were researching, the teams and the leaders, and they said, is that team effective? And is that team effective? And which teams is your team effective? And for some value of the word effective. And so there was a general consensus over these teams were effective and those teams aren't. And then they could use that to say, okay, so what are the relative attributes of those teams? So effectiveness is loosely constructed, but the key thing is they were looking for is what are for these teams that everybody agrees are effective, and in contrast to these other teams that everybody agrees are not effective, or at least most people agree. What are their relative attributes? And so they really wanted to focus on that. So they surveyed hundreds of teams and team leaders and executives to arrive at this pool of data, and then they mishmashed it through various. They used math, which is that's that's all I can say. But what they were they started off with a hypothesis of 22 attributes that they were looking for. So they were testing things like how many people do you have with or how many years of industry experience are on the team. How many people? What is the average or the range of tenure for people who've been on the team? What is their tenure at Google? What is their what are their relative experience levels throughout? What are their where are they in the promotion hierarchy? And so they had 22 of those kinds of attributes, and they did their magic math and to identify which of those 22 attributes correlated with the effective teams versus the ineffective teams. And what came out was there are 5 attributes that came out. So let me show you this. Let's see, share screen. That one.
Yes, sir. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
So when you're talking about the effectiveness, the measuring of effectiveness, right? So is it like, they are measuring in terms of like, okay, how many teams had successful projects completed, or is it in terms of like the management perspective? Because you can look in 3 ways, right? If you say like, okay, is your team effective? Now, the perspective of a manager will be different. The perspective of the individual contributor or the member of the team will be different. And as a leadership, the top of the company, how they are looking, if this team is successful or not.
That's a great question. And the best answer I've heard so far is that it was very subjective. It was a sense of you ask people, either the team leaders or the team members or the executives, do you consider this team effective or not? And so it was just, it was very much a thumbs up or thumbs down measure, and they didn't try to identify those. They didn't try to answer the question as to what does effectiveness really mean. Certainly, a lot will depend upon what is your perspective of what a team should be accomplishing. But that's my supposition. But I did not participate in the research. Anyway, so any other questions right now? Or does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, but I'm trying to get the feeling like, okay, so if I know where I have to make changes, that would be like, helpful. That's the thing. That's where I'm trying to arrive at.
That sounds like we might need to get into a deeper conversation. So I'm curious about what is the question. It sounds like you're facing a situation that is probably adjacent to this topic, but I'd love to learn more about what it is that amounts to.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I can ask you, separately.
Okay, that'd be great. Okay,
yeah.
So these are the 5 attributes of those 22 attributes that they were testing and measuring in these it was like 180 teams, I think. These are the 5 attributes that stood out as they correlate well with effective teams. And if you go to Google's published the documents on this or published research on this, they use a different graphic than I do. I like the pyramid just because I see some parallelism with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that's getting off into the weeds from our current topic. But the point is here that psychological safety is the foundation of it all. And it was the single strongest correlate with team effectiveness. And in my experience in doing the TeamDev Consulting at Google, if a team does not have psychological safety, nothing else matters, because nothing else is going to grow. There has to be this is good soil to grow the team in if it feels safe. And so almost always when we get leaders coming to the TeamDev Consulting group to ask for some help, the first thing they say is, I want to grow psychological safety on my team. But the other 4 attributes are dependability, which is, can I rely on my teammates to deliver quality work? Structure and clarity, which is, do we have a shared sense of what we're trying to accomplish and how we're going to go about doing it, like who's responsible for what? And I know that was mentioned in our earlier conversation. In fact, Lori, I think you're the one who mentioned that. And then meaning and impact, which meaning is the work inherently relevant to me as a team member, and impact is, am I having is having an impact on others that is appreciated. And so that's I see that those two they tie very closely to a sense of self-actualization and self-transcendence. So I think that those are, and this is just my opinion, the research didn't bear this out, but my opinion is that that is how Maslow's, the upper echelons of Maslow's hierarchy shows up in a team context. But getting back down to the others, the research also found there's something of an inverse inverse relationship between structure and clarity on one hand and dependability on the other. If a team, if they know each other really well and they trust each other and they know what to expect of each other, so they're highly dependable, they don't need a lot of structure and clarity. That might just look like bureaucracy to them or extra process. Whereas if the team does not have that sense of intimate knowledge of each other's work and capabilities and such, then having a structure and clarity of what is our objective and how we're going to go, and what is the strategy we're going to use to realize that objective, that becomes more relevant. So there's something of an inverse relationship there. But again, psychological safety is the single biggest attribute. And so we're going to spend pretty much the rest of this hour just doing a deeper dive on psychological safety. Any questions on this before I go on? Okay, let's see. Stop sharing. There we go. So, what does psychological safety look like? You're welcome to share and just we talked a little bit about this earlier, but what does it mean to be psychologically safe?
I have no idea how to answer that. I mean, it seems like we should sort of know. I don't know.
I think basically that you are welcomed about your ideas, that you are not judged being like wrong or any one particular idea probably. And this is more of like my thinking, like, psychological feeling, right? Like when you are in a team and you are discussing something, you are always in that fear, like, oh, what if, like, I'm saying this and I'm judged for this or something like that. I mean, that's my thought about it.
Yeah. So what I found in my experience at Google is that the teams that had psychological safety, someone could say, "Oh, that was my mistake. Oops, my bad. I'll do it better next time, or I won't do it that way again." Or someone might say, "I don't know how to do this. Will you help me? Help me figure it out?" And just Google is famous for having a real high bar in hiring, and I still can't figure out why they hired me. But the sense is that, or they used to brag about the fact they hire smart people, and for someone to get past that bar and then still feel safe saying, "I don't know this. This is unfamiliar to me, and I need help." That is often a big hurdle for Googlers to get past, and so it requires a bit of I guess maturity to be able to say, "Yeah, I don't know everything," and some other people around me do, or at least they know more about this topic than I do.
Also,
Sure.
I was just curious a little bit about that too, because the interview process, which I know many of us have been through, that can feel pretty daunting for sure. But and then there are times where that security of being part of it seems like there's so much of the environment, I should say, around it that can shift. And so what was safe, a month ago in an environment like we're in now, when you start looking at some of the big firms that are suddenly laying people off or whatever, I mean, I think it can certainly weigh in for people for the environment that begins to shift. And so I'm curious, how that fits into the psychological safety too, maybe that's just my own lack of.
I think you're hitting on something that is a key point, and that is in the organizational, the organizational ethos. What does it take to get fired?
Yes.
And
yes.
And first out, so Google makes a lot of decisions by committee, just because they're trying to filter out the individual interpersonal dynamics. So they're trying to correct for that and calibrate career decisions or personnel decisions based on that. So, for example, no manager at Google can hire me unless they're like a VP or above. Managers don't have hiring authority. Managers can nominate somebody to be hired, but then it goes to the hiring committee. And so that committee has to have a net thumbs up or thumbs down for hiring somebody, and they've never met this person, so they get the interview notes from all the people that interviewed them, and those interviews should be fairly rigorous, and they should and objective. yeah, and they'll do interviews for technical competence in a certain space, but there's also often they'll also there'll be one person who's responsible to interview you for googliness, and googliness is a loosely defined a term, but it basically means do you share our values? Are you interested? Are you curious? Do you want to make the world better? What is it you want to what is it you want to do in the world? And are you a team player in the sense that do you help the people around you? And so it's very much looking into what are your values and what makes you tick. So it's not just can you do the job.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm. But other parts of the environment that make it hard to get fired, as long as I am not doing something deliberately to harm the company or the customers or my teammates, it's really hard to fire me because there's an assumption of assuming best intent, and that shows up as we know you're smart because you got past hiring committee, so we know you're qualified, and so we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt in every way possible. So if there's something that, for example, in Google's SRE, the Site Reliability Engineering Department, they have this notion of the blameless postmortem. So if there's a failure, they want to do a postmortem analysis into why that was. And they're going to assume that if you made a mistake, it wasn't because you intended to make that mistake. It's because there was maybe the tools were wrong, or you got the wrong signals, or the process wasn't clear, documentation wasn't good, or you didn't, or maybe there was some training that was expected, that we expect you to have that you didn't have. And even if that for some reason it's decided that you are actually incompetent in that space, that still points to a systemic problem. It means that the system didn't catch that earlier. So everything is assumed to be a systemic problem, not a personal problem. And so again, unless you are being malicious and trying to do harm, it's really hard to get fired at Google. Now, the last time I heard of Google was getting laid off was back in 2009, when we had the last recession, and they started they put on a hiring freeze, I think across the company, and they started furloughing or laying off recruiters. And it took about a month and a half or 2 months before then I realized, oh, wait a minute, this recession isn't affecting us because everybody is pulling their advertising money from regular media and going to Google Ads or other internet media, and so we're actually need to ramp up faster. And so they had to say, they had to go, okay, unlay off. So yeah, so it was that was the only time I've heard of people being laid off. Now I did get a letter once where they told me that my role was being eliminated, actually being moved to Los Angeles, and I didn't want to move to Los Angeles. I'm up in Seattle. My role is being moved to Los Angeles, and they said, if you want to go, we'll pay for you to go. We'll move your family. But I said, no, I have roots up here, so I'll pass. So they gave me 60 days to find another role on another team, in which that happens. But it's more of a matter of there's plenty of opportunity for Googlers to try and find some way of delivering value to the organization. How much time we got left? Oh, okay. Other things that help with psychological safety is adopting a learning mindset. So I talked about the blameless postmortems. The objective of the postmortem is to learn what went wrong and to learn what we can do differently next time, or what we can do to avoid this kind of a failure in the future. So it's and very often if there's a software team is developing a new application or a new feature, and they don't know exactly how to do it. Well, they want to run some tests with real users and learn how to and try to fail as quickly as possible, so they can learn from it and see which way not to go, if nothing else. So the term psychological safety, that came from Amy Edmondson's research back in the 80s, I think. So she's a professor at Harvard now, and she was doing some research on hospitals and healthcare institutions, and was trying to figure out why some were better than others, and she's just trying to capture how the level of psychological safety and the learning mindset that I was just talking about, how does that impact patient care and patient outcomes? And she found a very high correlation in her research between teams that felt safe enough where they could say, yeah, I gave the wrong medication, or I gave the wrong dose, or something like that. And people, when people felt comfortable and safe doing that, one, that it also showed that institution reported higher errors than anybody else, because people were willing to admit they made errors, but they also had much better patient outcomes. And so it's the hospital where people don't feel safe, they don't report those kinds of errors, that on paper they look like they're better, but you got to look at the patient outcomes, and you'll see not so much. Anyway, so that's kind of where the term psychological safety came from, and how that ethos has been translated into Google's culture. Okay, I have another question for you. What kills psychological safety?
Blame.
I did. Sorry, what did you say? Blame.
Sorry, yeah. Blame, finger pointing.
Yeah, finger pointing and
lack of ownership.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I was on a team where the leader belittled everybody, made them feel very small. And so then the whole rest of the team would try to make everybody else also feel small. So like less tolerance for those mistakes that you were just talking about there, Brian.
Jennifer, hold on to that thought, because I'm going to talk about the actual opposite of that when we talk about what grows psychological safety. Because that's the first thing that I get asked when I'm helping a team with whatever they want to however they want to whatever event or activity they want to get into is very often the leader will say, how do I grow psychological safety on my team? And so we'll let me get to that in a minute. Let me talk about some of you probably heard about this, the Tuckman organizational small group development model. Let's see, I want to do this. Present, next page. There we go. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's heard of this, where Tuckman did his research. I think he published this back in the mid-1960s. The stages of small group development, where initially when people get together to form a new team, it's in the forming stage, everybody's polite. And so they're nice, and they're wearing a nice mask, and they're not being authentic in that space, in the sense of they're not being vulnerable. And then it moves into a stage where people are trying to establish their credibility amongst their peers. And the recurring question is, or the recurring statement is, in one form or another, is, this is why you should listen to me. This is why you should respect what I'm doing. And then that's messy, and it looks, kind of counterproductive. But ultimately, the team gets to a point where they develop norms of behavior. Of this is what Tim is good at. That's what Mike is good at, and don't get them in the same room on the same project, because they'll never agree. So but they develop those kinds of artifices or mechanisms to make the work get better, and ultimately they get to the point where it's like they're in the whole team is in flow, and they're performing at a very high state. And then since Tuckman published his work, people say, well, then there's the last stage of adjourning. But I've never seen a team get that far unless a product is being turned down or something where the entire whole organization is being removed. Now, what I see at Google is more like this. You get out of the forming stage and you're into the storming and norming. You're just getting, kind of getting norming done. And you're hoping to get to performing, and then there's a reorg. Either a new team leader or either at the team leader level or one or two skip levels up, or there's a merging of two teams or a splitting of teams, and so there's the whole process starts all over again. You have to go back to the forming. The team goes back to the forming stage, and they have to reestablish. They're polite. Then they have to kind of establish their credibility with their teammates, and then they can start establishing the norms of behavior. And then guess what happens again? It's constantly. In 2017, I'm told, Google had, I think it was 897 reorgs. And those are the ones that it knows about. Because some teams would restructure, and they wouldn't tell the folks in the organizational development department. So it was like, those were like under the radar. But reorging is a near constant. I've been through, oh gosh, 8 or 9 reorgs in the last 5 years. No, 6 years now. And it's just, it's constant. And you're constantly trying to reestablish, okay, where do I fit where do I fit on my team? And it really takes up cognitive energy and emotional energy, and that detracts from you being able to apply energy in your work. Anyway, so that's one of the things that really works against psychological safety. What else is there in my notes here? Oh, focusing on individual performance. So, you ever been on a team where there was a high value, the company really wants to reward superstars. And so there's an opportunity for a big bonus or some other a perk that is, it's only gonna be given to one person on the team maybe. And everybody's competing for it, and they say, well, this will get performance up, right? Well, what that becomes is that the team is competing against each other. It instead of becoming, it's a me versus my teammates instead of us against the rest of the world. And so it's that's another thing that I see at Google that is, frankly, just my opinion, I think is Google's Achilles heel, is the performance review and promotion process, because it is so tuned to individual performance to the detriment of team performance that it really eats away at this opportunity for psychological safety on the team. So, yeah. What else? What's next on my notes? What improves psychological safety? So, what I get from team leaders very early on is they'll ask me, what's the best way for me well, let's say, how can I build psychological safety? And the first thing I'll say back is, you can't build it. You got to grow it. You got to move from a mechanistic engineering mindset to an agricultural or gardening mindset. It's, the idea is that you till the soil and you plant the seed and you water it and you nurture it and you fertilize it, and hopefully what sprouts is what you planted. And that's very different from a lot of the way people think about things in a corporate environment, especially one that's half engineers like Google is. But my answer, once we get the terminology down and we're talking about growing psychological safety, my answer is to model vulnerability. So we were talking earlier, who was Jennifer or Lori were talking about this toxic leadership that was very much putting other people down. The best way to build psychological safety and actually grow your team effectiveness in that way is to put yourself down. Not so much, that's not the right way to put it. Be vulnerable, admit mistakes to others, and tell your team about a time you made a mistake and what you learned from it, and as bad as that might feel when you're being vulnerable, you're doing wonders to let other people be that honest too. Oh, let's see. Oh, cultivating shared values at the organizational level. I talked about the blameless postmortems and the assume benign intent. That's fundamental at Google. Without that, I can't see how anything else is possible. But other things are, let's see. When teams at Google have summits, because we have a lot of remote teams that are either working in different parts of the country or they're even on different continents. They'll get together every now and then for a global summit, and one of the first things that at the top of their list for the agenda for that global summit is what I call get to know you activities. Whether it's playing a game, going to play shuffleboard or miniature golfing, or going to a pottery studio and throwing some clay on a wheel, just doing things together to cultivate opportunities to learn about each other outside of a work context. And that when the team can see each other as humans instead of as cogs in a machine, it cultivates a sense of trust amongst those team members. So that's very, in fact, if I am called to help plan a team summit and they don't have those kinds of activities, I'll raise my hand and say, you got to put something in here to whether it's a team dinner or some other fun activity, just to get the team away from the office and able to have those kinds of opportunities to see each other as real people. One of the things I love to do in that space is it's an activity that we call shields, and it's a I was thinking about doing an exercise like that here, but I don't see enough time to do it. But it's basically without using words on a page, draw pictures to represent something that's really important to you, some feedback you're working on, a recommendation or a way that you're often misunderstood, and recommendation for working with me. And so draw a little cartoon that represents each of those four topics, and then we go around the team and we share those cartoons. And just drawing a cartoon is inherently vulnerable. Now, Lori, I know what you do, so I know that you would be awesome at drawing that stuff, but when you get engineers together to draw stick figures, they feel really vulnerable. It's really good for them to experience that kind of vulnerability. What else? Let's see. Yeah, and that covers it. So
I don't know. I think you could send them to a YOL event as well, because that brings people together. You do a service, you do some yoga, you eat some amazing food. I'm telling you, you see people in a whole different light.
I agree, and so I've only known about YOL for about 2.5 weeks, and so I'm still learning of what YOL means in this space, and I suspect that that is very. I see resonance between what YOL's trying to do and what Project Aristotle was trying to determine, and how to build that sense of teamwork and vulnerability and dependability. What else we got?
Yeah, there's nothing more vulnerable than seeing your teammates in yoga pants. I don't know, but
Oh yeah. Okay, I got a closing quote and then some information on how to get in touch with me. So let's see. There we go. Okay, so I'm a Simon Sinek fanboy, and my favorite quote of his is that if you hire people for what they can do, they'll work for your money. But if you hire them for what they believe, they'll work with blood, sweat, and tears. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter at BrianKHaney, or you can just email me, bkh@briankhaney.com. My passion project at Google has been this team development work and coaching, but I'm just starting to bring that outside of Google too. So I welcome opportunities to share the kind of stuff that Google is building inside. Any other questions?
Yeah, quick question. So we do see like a certain group building activities, but people like sometimes don't show up. Like they say like either too busy to do some things, or does that happen in Google? I know everybody will be working on like a very tight schedules, and like so how does that work around in Google? How do people come for these team building activities, take time from the schedule and come?
That's a good question. And a lot depends upon how the invitation was framed. And it's the leader has basically, they have a sales job, and that they have to sell participation as something that would benefit the individual as well. And if they hear from others who've done either they see things that they're unsure about, or it could be there are perfectly legitimate reasons for someone to say I can't go, either family obligations or there's something else going on that everyone else is not necessarily aware of. And so part of the Google ethos is the assumption that you know best how you show up best at work. So whatever you need, let's do that first, and then let's try and see if we can move things off your plate long enough that you can join the team. And so very often for planning a global summit, a lot of planning has to go into managing the workload of the team so that they can create that space. And it's, in fact, that's kind of what I see as my biggest, one of my jobs in planning and facilitating these kinds of events is I'm there to mostly, I'll introduce a couple of frameworks, I'll ask questions, and I'll hold space. In fact, several times you heard me today, or you heard in this last hour, that I'd ask a question and I just wait for somebody to answer. and people, when I do that with a team, they'll say, "Oh, that feels so awkward." And I said, "Yep, because I can hold the space longer than you can hold the awkward." So that's the way. That's what it takes is letting these team members know that the space is being held for you. So please join us, and if it doesn't look like it's what you need or what would serve you best, you get to decide.